Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 12th of June 2024. I forgot to mention this in my Patriot section to my military aid video earlier, which is rather silly of me. There's a whole section on how the Germans are giving another Patriot system battery to Ukraine, possibly a fourth one, on a way that the Netherlands have got together to at least partially give the arguably one of the most important components of a system and two launchers. And I forgot to say that the Americans are giving a launch. I think I forgot to say anyway. Ukraine is going to receive another Patriot air defense system from the US. This has been reported by New York Times. Based on their source, the Biden administration has approved the delivery. The system is currently in Poland. It will be the second Patriot the US. Germany has supplied, and the US has supplied. Germany supplied 3, and the Netherlands another 1. Well, they've provided. Not quite. They provided 2 launches previously, and then a couple more launches, I think, now, and the radar system. So they'd need like the power system, the mast, and maybe the command center. So it needs other components. The total being here 4 Patriots from Germany, if the next one is due to go as well. 2 from the US. A SAMP-T from France and Italy together, and a SAMP-T from Italy reportedly on the way. That's equivalent to a Patriot to some degree. I don't know the exact difference. I think that it's kind of better in this area, but not as good in that area type thing. 1 Patriot consisting of 3 launches and a radar gathered by the Netherlands. And of course, they'd given 2 extra launches previously. So actually, that's 3 launches this time. So they've given 5 launches or will have given 5 in total. 8 to 9 Patriots and SAMP-T batteries, which can be enough to protect Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, 2 F-16 bases, and 1 for the front. However, Ukraine needs at least 6 to 7 more systems to effectively protect the country from Russian missile attacks. In total, Ukraine needs to have at least 15 or 16 Patriot and SAMP-T batteries to defend the country. Of course, I guess it's whether the Ukrainians will want to, they can buy with the money they're receiving to make procurements. They might be able to buy another one, but then if that money comes from certain areas, and usually it's ring fenced to buy from those areas, so that would have to be maybe from American money in order to buy from America. I don't know, all these different sorts of variables to consider. And there you have who has Patriot systems, and lots more on that from that source. Ukraine battle map. We'll go on to the Frontline map now. As you can see, hardly any change today. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on this screen at the moment. I've told you previously that Surat Maps has not mapped since June the 4th. We're now June the 12th, so it's 8 days of not mapping. I have not included their map on this synthesis of these different mappers. Usually you'd have a red section in here, slightly different colour red section to denote the Russian front lines as according to them, but now it's kind of left blank, which means that we have Andrew Perpetua's line. The first line denotes the Russian defensive line, the second line denotes the Ukrainian defensive line, and in between is the grey zone, and then we have Deep State Maps Russian defensive line. So there's a little bit of difference here and there between the two mappers. As you can see, no change to the northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna. No change to the Seversk front line, although the ISW does report that the Russians are claiming they've made some gains around the chalk pit area, but that's not been confirmed at all. Actually, to go to the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, they do say that there is geolocated footage published on the June the 10th that shows that Ukrainians have regained positions along the Lipsy-Kharkiv road here. So we will go back up to that northern area, even though there's no change to this these two sectors, which indicates that the Russians are not doing very well. They have basically it seems that the whole thing's pitted out there. Let's go to look at the geolocation. So in the Kharkiv direction, active hostilities in the Lipsy area, just to let you know exactly where that is. So you have Kharkiv there. That's in that northeastern area of Ukraine. You've got Belgorod city and Belgorod Oblast here, and they are attacking the Russians, or I don't know whether they really are anymore, in these two separate areas. It's not contiguous. It's separated by an area where they don't have presence, and to the very western side of their westerly sector, Geopolitics and downwards, they were attacking towards Lipsy to try and get purchase here and the ability to fire at Kharkiv with their artillery, just bog standard barrel artillery there, but doesn't seem to be the case. Now we have a geolocation where the Ukrainians are attacking motorized rifle units south of Geopolitics and landing at a position on the Litsy-Pilnaya highway. Then they are shelled by Russians in that area. So this is where the Ukrainians were attacking. Let's put that on to our map. And interesting, so that's into Andrew Perpetua's grey zone, not quite at the Russian defensive line areas, but this is where they're landing their troops. So they're obviously very active. That doesn't change the map, but it would, I guess, confirm or doesn't disconfirm what the mappers are saying. So you would expect the Ukrainian troops to be not so much to be landing in the Russian controlled area necessarily, but to land in the grey zone and try and push forward into the Russian controlled area. So that appears to be what's going on there. And then, as we were doing, let's come back down to Seversk. Bakhmut, no change. Chasiv Yar on the western edge of Bakhmut, or out to the west of Bakhmut past Ivanivska. We can see there are these three focuses here, the Bodanivka to Kalinivka axis, and then you've got the Canal micro district. And you have down to the south along this highway that goes through T0504 through Ivaniska. The Russians, pressing in each of these places, having some success moving through the Canal micro district. Both mappers agree that the Russians have been pushed. The Ukrainians have been pushed more to the outskirts of that. It doesn't seem like the Ukrainians have been pushed back to the other side of the canal, at least not yet. I'm sure it will happen. Institute for the Study of War says that a spokesperson for the Ukrainians claims that the Russian forces are still not operating within Chasiv Yar, so they haven't got across the canal yet, but are continuing efforts to advance in the canal and Novi micro districts, eastern Chasiv Yar. Russian mill bloggers reiterated claims that Russian forces seized a large area of the canal micro district, and that fighting is ongoing on the western part of that. But ISW has not observed evidence of further Russian advances in the area. So that is to say that fighting is going on there. Talking about Novi micro district, which I think it's this area here. So there have been these attacks across the canal on foot through the wooded areas to attack there, but they have been stymied, the Russians, in so doing. It's difficult terrain to get through. You can't get your mechanized equipment there, so it has to be done on foot, which is always going to be more challenging for the attackers. Right, so that is Chasiv Yar. Not too much to report. We come down to Avdiivka, and Deep State Map is aligning the map with Andrew Perpetua just to the south, I guess, west-southwest of Ocheratina there. Goodness me, words. The Russians have been pushing the Ukrainians back towards Sokil. Sokil gets a bit of a mention in the ISW, but nothing that bears really repeating. And according to Deep State Maps, the Ukrainians have been pushed out of, or to the outskirts of, Novopokrovska there, on the way to Novoselivka, Persia, in that Pokrovsk direction. So some slight gains for the Russians maybe there. And then that's it. That's it for the entire front line. And again, does this indicate that the Russians have culminated? It appears that they are not really taking too much territory. They will keep pushing in these areas and take villages here and there. Absolutely no doubt about that. But I can't foresee that they have much left in the tank for some major offensive. And this is kind of what happened on previous Russian offensives. Like last year, we're expecting more. And I was saying the similar things a year ago before the Ukrainian counteroffensive. It was like, well, is that it? Is that the major Russian offensive? I can't foresee that they've got much in the tank to do anything more than they're doing. And lo and behold, they didn't. Then the Ukrainians went on an offensive, and it was too difficult because of fortifications, etc., etc. We all know the story. It makes me, this kind of situation makes me conclude again that either side is going to struggle, I think, with making military gains. If you're talking about huge numbers of troops and equipment traveling over land to take territory, I think that's difficult if the defenders have enough troops and weaponry to defend those positions. It becomes too difficult as long as they are laying enough mines. Now, one of the components that has changed, and this is worth considering. So I was just going to say that I can't see either side being able to make particularly decent ground territory gains as it stands. One difference from the May offensive last year to now, or two differences actually. If you remember looking statistically, in fact, we can do this just so you understand I'm not talking out my posterior. We can look at what happened to the artillery systems of the Russians. And luckily, Dell has been putting the statistics together for us for some time. I'm going to move my stupid head because you don't want to be looking at that. You want to be looking at stats. So here we have the Russian losses of artillery. Make it a little bit smaller, and so we can look at the dates. And over here in May 2023, just here, what do you notice? So this is what a year and a half worth of war had done to Russian artillery, and we've seen a couple of spikes that would have been the Kharkiv counteroffensive and a Kherson counteroffensive, and the Russians lost a bit of equipment there. And then it was all pretty much as it was. And then the Ukrainians attacked in May last year, and they got hammered at Malotokmachka, and they realized, oh my goodness, we can't do this. Things are going to have to change because we're getting hammered by artillery, mortars, mines, ATGMs, and attack helicopters. So what the Ukrainians done since then, that would possibly mean that if they did mount a counter offensive, they would have a different result. There's nothing like the old adage, the sign of insanity is doing the same thing again and again, expecting different results. So they could attack again. Let's take Robotina as an example. They could attack again down here. And could they get a different result? What has changed? Well, one thing, the Russian forces have been attrited more, and they've got a force quality dilution. So although they are gaining experience over time, they are drafting in people from abroad. They are drafting in not very well trained people with not the best equipment. Okay, so you could argue that the troops that they have are less decent than the troops they had last year. So that's a slight difference. Then we can look at artillery systems. Say, okay, from that moment they failed at Malotokmachka, what did the Ukrainians do? Well, they realized they had to take out artillery. So straight away, and we noticed that straight away, and I talked about it in May last year. I said, oh dear, that's happened, but look what's happening. There's a spike up, as according to the General Staff, so assuming the figures are at least somewhat correct, there's a spike upwards of artillery pieces being taken out. And the Ukrainians went around trying to change the situation so that if they did do it again, they wouldn't be doing the same thing and expecting a different result. They'd be doing something different because the variables would have changed. And we have seen a massive loss of artillery around that period, and then it sort of dipped back down as the Russians went on the attack. And so the Ukrainians were back against it. So although there were days of crazy Russian losses of artillery, that was a period of the Russians really with the initiative. And then the Ukrainians were able to soak up that initiative, and then around about, where do we see, January this year, you see the artillery systems again getting hammered. And that's where the Ukrainians have developed the ability to take out artillery with, I would imagine, predominantly first-person view drones and other drones, where they were lacking the equipment from, say, for example, the United States in terms of artillery ammunition for counter-battery fire. They were able to take out artillery with other means, and they've been able to do that really solidly ever since, to the point where the Russians are losing more at the moment than they were before. I mean, really heavy artillery losses. What that then means is that if this is happening, let's take Robotina. So if you're thinking, right, let's attack now in Robotina, but before we got hammered on mines, well, actually, a lot of those mines might have been used up in literally all the fighting that's taken place. So fewer mines, maybe. I don't know if that's the case everywhere, but it could be that there are fewer mines. It could be that the Russian troops are fewer and are not as well trained, and equipped. It could be that the Russian artillery systems are fewer. ATACMS have come on board. The Russian helicopters have been moved back, and some have been shot down, but mainly moved out of the way. So if the Ukraine is attacked again and they have ATACMS, it could be that the Russians won't be prepared to send in their attack helicopters in a way that they did before, and they were taking out the Ukrainians really heavily. So that's changed. We have, and this is super, super important. So we go to air defense systems down here, anti-aircraft, and we look at the losses. There is, although there are fewer of these, right, than say artillery pieces, we can see that in May last year, the Ukrainians also went about trying to take out Russian air defense systems. So they said, we can't attack like this without having air advantage and without being able to take out some of the opposition aircraft. So we need to get our air defense systems. We need to get more of them, and we need to get them closer to the front line. But we also would like to support our own troops with our own attack helicopters and close air support airframes. And we can't do that with the Russian air defences in place. So they went around, it seems, very systematically trying to trick the Russian air defences. And they've been famously doing that ever since. So if you look at the density of these statistics in this time period compared to the density previously, you see a marked difference, right? This is a lot oranger here, a lot more orange here. And that means that we could have another variable that has changed, which is air defense systems attrited. We've heard that Crimea, they are in all sorts of trouble. They are moving systems up to Belgorod because Belgorod's in all sorts of trouble. So it could be along the front lines, the Russians are lacking in air defense systems, which means that if the Ukrainians did attack again in a new counteroffensive, maybe at the beginning of 2025 or something. I'm not saying in 2024, but putting all these variables together, they could be able to use F-16s that are coming along, maybe some Mirages or whatever. They will be able to support possibly their frontline troops with air support because of the attrition of air defences, whilst also having an artillery advantage, whilst also being able to use ATACMS and HIMARS, and while having a production of their own infantry fighting vehicles, such as the Lynx with the Rheinmetall plant in Ukraine, and still getting things like Bradleys from the Americans, etc., etc. The only, I think, road block for the Ukrainians would be mobilization of their own troops. They need a lot of troops to be able to do this. Can the Ukrainians eventually build up enough forces to do a counter-offensive of a major sort? If they keep going the way they are, and you could argue not to rush this, to wait till 2025, keep another 6 months of doing the kind of attrition that we are seeing with these statistics, so that the Russians are eventually left with a real scarcity of equipment, and maybe then the Ukrainians will be able to push forward. But that might coincide with a political implosion, an economic implosion as well, if things keep going for the Russians for another 6 months in the way that they are at the moment. So there's not so much today of a frontline update, but more of a kind of where are we at? Is this looking good for Ukraine? I would argue yes. It could be that Russians then start taking more territory over the next few weeks and we see them push through and break through in certain areas, but it's not looking like that's the case. There are certain very difficult areas, Novomykhailivka, Avdiivka, Chasiv Yar, are the ones that we know about. Certain areas maybe on that northeastern front, but I don't think that's particularly important there. It's more important down here. It's challenging for the Russians, I think, at the moment. Now, the last thing to say is regarding the Institute for the Study of War down in the Robotyne area where we were just sort of speculating. Let's go back there. Here's Robotyne. All of these horrible fortifications that the Russians have done such a good job of building still present a massive challenge for any future attack. But we have the ISW saying, Ukrainian volunteer spokesperson stated that Russian forces cannot conduct significant ground assaults in this area due to Ukrainian forces' drone use, which has led to a high degree of visibility on the battlefield. Bratchuk described Russian operations in this area as tactically or operationally decisive, as not tactically or operationally decisive, but stated these operations may be, quote, emotional to demonstrate some kind of victory on the battlefield, suggesting that Russian forces are likely mostly pursuing offensive operations here for informational as opposed to significant physical effects. Russian sources familiar with this area have similarly complained about how Ukrainian drone use is inhibiting Russian forces' ability to operate in this sector of the front. So two things. One, this is another example of how the Ukrainians appear to have a drone advantage over the Russians, as we have heard from multiple sources on multiple occasions. And two, that the Russian activity here isn't tactically significant, doesn't have tactics in mind. It doesn't have operational objectives in mind. I mean, you could argue that they are trying to take Kyiv, but I don't know that that's necessarily the case. They just want to put a flag up in Robotyne and go, look, and send that up. It's that Varanyo, BS going up and up the chain of command until someone at the top goes, oh, we've got a flag in a new place. Brilliant. Well done, us. But actually, it has very little meaning outside of that. And that is what the claim is here from the Ukrainians. Now, I can't speak to the accuracy of that, but interesting. And it might fit in with Russians' lack of ability to really do meaningful, large-scale operational maneuvers and assaults up and down a front line. You've almost got that here. Along this neck of the front line, neck of the woods, or maybe up in Bakhmut. But as I said before, the Russians had a chance of bolstering those forces with 50,000 troops. And instead of doing that, which is what I advised they should have done at the time, they went up to attack on another front in Kharkiv and managed to attrit those forces. Then that precipitated a change of restrictions, which wasn't in place. So Kharkiv would have carried on getting hit with S-300s, and the Ukrainians would have sat there and soaked it up. But as a result of that attack, it precipitated a change of restrictions that allowed HIMARS and other munitions to be and systems to be able to shoot at the S-300s and 400s in Belgorod, to the point where Pierre says today, we've had one more day of not a single S-300 hitting Kharkiv. That has now been the case for ages. Those S-300s taken out up there have been incredibly significant for the Ukrainians. Now, that's great for Kharkiv, but it's actually a kick in the teeth for the Russians, because they are even less able to force a breakthrough in any of these areas that, had they put those 50,000 troops, they might well have been able to Kharkiv. You're talking about this idea that they're just maybe getting to a point where they could get over the canal here, but it's very difficult for the Russians. They are losing lots of troops. It is tough grind. It's a huge grind. They've made very slow advances. Think of when they took Bakhmut, and this is where they're at now. Like, this is from the counteroffensive. This, just is wholly underwhelming. Now, with 50,000 troops, guaranteed that could have made a big difference. Didn't make that choice. More fool them. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all of your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.